Hi, this is John Harcher. Welcome to episode 42 of Valleys of Numenor. We've reached the season 2 finale of Foundation, where it looks like we don't actually have a foundation anymore. But we know it's got to be there somewhere, or else we won't have a series anymore. So how will they get out of this one? Episode 42, Foundation 0210, Creation Myths. Alex Graves is back directing for the last episode of the season. Now, remember, Harry Seldon was dead in the water, but somehow showed up at the end of last episode to beat Telebon senseless? We find out how he did it here. Gale did a combination warging and a Jedi mind trick to get into Harry's mind, then use him to make the guard release him. Harry then killed him, the thanks you get, then chained him into place so everyone would think they'd see Harry floating there, even Salver. He escaped into the mountains, but they needed a shield to keep everyone out of their heads, which is why she was counting primes again. Outside the ship, the Mentalics all show up to let them know that with Bond dead, they've been freed. Back in Demerzel's chamber behind the mural, Dusk and Rue are trapped behind the beams that kept the robot in place for all those years. Now, were they trapped there since last time? It wasn't very clear. Or did they go in and then she had to go down to get them because the alarm sounded? Speaking of, just then, Demerzel enters. This is why she had to rush back from Terminus. Turns out she was the one who came up with the names Dawn, Day, and Dusk. She also came up with the idea of the assassins, which, considering what they did to her, goes against a whole bunch of the robotic laws, so her programming is way off script. She also arranged it so it's clearly Sareth who hired them. The queen is arrested and scheduled for execution, but the problem is no one was supposed to know about it. Dusk forgives her for what she's about to do. With actual honest-to-God tears in her eyes, she does what she has to do and leaves the chamber. Out by what's left of Terminus, Day is loving what he's seeing. He tells the fleet to prepare to jump. The general thinks they're going back to Trantor, but the Emperor demands Constant tell him the name of the planets in their sphere of influence. He then tells them they will start with the destruction of Thespis. Belrios tells him why it will be the end of everything if he does it, but Day slaps him and orders him to do it again. The general refuses. Day then commands the spacer to jump to Thespis. She sets a sequence in place right as Hober Mallow's arm lights up. That's weird. Suddenly, one ship in the fleet after another begins to explode. Turns out the spacer set the sequence so each ship will jump into the ship next to it. It can't be stopped, and no one can use the lifeboats. Turns out, Hober Mallow's and Harry Seldon's gambit worked after all. Mallow then gives the rundown of exactly how it worked. He needed to be on the Emperor's ship to set the sequence in motion, and the entire fleet had to be in one place. Despite his belief he was thinking outside the box, Day was acting totally predictable, which Harry did. Predicted him right down to the exact instant. The Emperor then starts pummeling Mallow, but as he's on the verge of death, Rios takes down Day and starts pummeling him. The two beat each other bloody, but in the end, Belrios is shoved into the airlock. As Day blasts him into space, he suddenly finds himself floating into the remnants of Terminus. The general was able to slip Mallow's castling device onto him during the fight. Everyone now prepares to meet their maker, but it turns out there's a way one and only one person can make it off the ship. On Trantor, Sareth is being led to prison. Dawn stops them, but Demerzel says it will be up to Day to decide what happens. As she turns to leave, she notices green marks on the side of her neck. When Dusk said goodbye to her in the chamber, he held her face in his hands and left those marks for Dawn to find, knowing he knows it's symbolizing the person who betrayed the realm. The young Emperor then says they will discuss the matter in his quarters. Back on the ship, the general shows them an old-fashioned cleaning module for the outside of the ship. It has room for one person and enough oxygen for about a day. Constant doesn't want to be the one to get away, but Mallow convinces her She's the only one of all of them who can spread the word about what happened and have people actually believe it. With that, she sent out into space, and the two remaining men go get the wine Hover was staving for a special event. In Sarah's quarters, Dawn emerges from a secret entrance and kills the guards, grabs her, and races back into the tunnel. Back out in space, the Imperial ship begins to rock sharply from the vessels exploding around it, so it's as good a time as any to break out the wine. The two toast and drink and realize it's not very good at all. So they dedicate it to a portion of Becky's anatomy as they go up in smoke. Back on Trantor, Demerzel just realized what happened and sees Dawn and Sareth announcing to the people what happened. They announce their wedding when the robot figures out it's not really them, but Sarah's servants using those digital image projectors from down in the sewers. See, everything they're using in this episode, they laid out before. Dawn and Sarah send a transmission to the robot, letting them know they've escaped and the queen is pregnant. He says he wishes her happiness, and they get away. On Ignis, Gale and Harry are having their wounds bound while Salvor flips her coin with the kids. Dornick notices the little boy Josiah is troubled, but takes some flowers a little girl gives her. As she's doing that, the boy picks up a gun. Harry and Salvor both see it and spring into action. Hardin jumps through the air and hurls her knife at the boy just as he fires. Turns out Tellenbahn took over his mind even though he tried to stop her. He dies, taking the old woman with him. The shot he fired missed its target, but hit Salvor. She knows she's not going to make it, but it shows the future isn't set. The warden is set on a funeral pyre, and Gale says goodbye to her daughter. Out in space, Constance's 24 hours of oxygen are almost up when she hears something outside. Making noise in space? It's a giant monolith out there in space. Okay, I'm joking a little bit, but it's a giant version of the vault. Her ship lands inside, and she gets out to find someone. A figure emerges out of the light. Polly. Is it a dream or the afterlife? No, it's actually him. She asks him if he was the only survivor. He says no and shows her that every single person from Terminus is there with them in the vault. We see Harry, we see Cermak, even Glawen was taken on board. The Foundation will indeed survive. Gale and Harry try to figure out if or how they can get the plan back on track. He tells her it may have already, but they won't know it until years or decades later. They just have to keep moving forward. Demerzel also knows she has to keep moving forward, so she activates a new dawn, day, and dusk to try to keep her plan in motion. And not only will they help with it, but her new toy as well, the Prime Radiant. Back on Ignis, Harry tells Gale she has to go back to sleep and wake up in the future where the mule is. She'll wake up once a year while Harry teaches the Mentalics. By the time she gets there, he'll be gone. She says there are two pods. He has to take the trip with her. She can't do this by herself. The Mentalics then take the pods off the ship, set them up in the temple, and the two get in. She recites the words Race said to her back to Harry as they fill up with whatever liquid they use to stay alive. 152 years later, the mule knows somehow he has to find Gale Dornick and destroy her, no matter what gets wiped out. I'd say the series hit its stride this season. The first one was a little herky-jerky. Like, they knew they wanted to get somewhere, but didn't know exactly how to do it. This time they had a definite plan, ironic for a series about a giant plan, of where they were starting and where they were going to finish by the end of the season. The actors who'd been in season one knew their roles and felt comfortable pushing the boundaries, so when the new characters, both from the books and those created for the series, came in, they were able to fit in fairly well. And it's a credit to all the actors and writers that at the end of this episode, when it was time to say goodbye to certain characters, gotta admit, I got a little choked up, even though I did have reservations that I mentioned of how the characters differed from their literary counterparts. So now we move on to the next section of the story. We're smack in the middle of the original trilogy. We've cleared the floor of Salvor Hardin, Holber Mallow, and Bel Rios. Who'd have thought Cermak would be the character to make it out of the season alive, other than Harry and Gale? The big question for next season, whenever that shows up, is exactly when will it start? We know where the people in the pods want to end up. Will it get that far immediately? What will the state of Trantor be, since we have 4 Cleons out there at the end of this episode? And will Demerzel's acquisition of the Prime Radiant start to alter her thinking more along the lines of her role in the books? Now, one thing I do have to say, they should try to make the references to other sources a little less blatant. I mean, when I saw the vault at the end, I would not have been surprised to hear. I mean, it couldn't have looked any more like the end of 2001 if they tried. I think it'd be scarier if they didn't realize that's what they were doing. I think they also had to realize the scene where Harry takes out Yana's killer would beat for beat Mufasa's death in The Lion King. Didn't they? I'll have my pop culture reference radar up when the show comes back. So that's it for the weekly recaps for a while. I'll chime in on a couple of the other shows on at the moment. There's enough people out there doing Star Wars stuff that I'm not going to be able to add much more to the conversation, but I'll just throw my 2 cents in after watching Ahsoka. Just give Dave Filoni the keys to the car, please. This was another character I had a lot of reservations about when she showed up, but what they've been able to do with her, yeah, he gets where Star Wars should be right now more than anyone else out there. And another show entering its 2nd season, Wheel of Time, also seems to have found its footing much more than season 1. As someone who did not read the books, I honestly could not keep track of what was going on last season. This time, I'm able to follow things a lot better. Here's hoping those who had legitimate complaints about Rings of Power, and there definitely were issues, will have them addressed when the show returns next year. I just hope they don't lose the good parts of what they were doing. We'll see in about a year from now. Next time, we'll finally finish up Tarzan of the movies. We'll pick up in the 80s with a sex symbol Jane, the best pedigreed Tarzan behind the screens we'd ever get, several TV shows, an Oscar-winning Disney production, and a return to the big screen with Nick Fury in tow. That's next time on Valleys to Numenor. Please hit the subscribe button if you like what you're hearing. I'm John Harchard. Thanks for listening.